Martha leaned against the weathered barn wall, her bare legs stretched out in the golden dust of late afternoon. The scrape on her knees still oozing a thin line of red. She had taken a fall from the old mare an hour earlier, and pride kept her from crying out now. The sun warmed her skin, and the smell of hay and horse and distant rain filled the air. She was 23 and felt 100 miles from the city life she had left behind 3 weeks ago. When her car gave out on the county road, Elias crouched in front of her, his hat pushed back just enough to show the silver in his hair and the kindness in his eyes that had seen 62 hard seasons. He had found her limping toward the ranch house, leading the mare by the reins, her face tight with pain and something deeper, something that looked like running away. He had said nothing, then only taken the reins from her hand and walked beside her all the way home. He studied the wound without touching her, yet his voice came low and steady like water over smooth river stones. "Are going to let me clean that knee, Martha? It's deeper than you think, and the dust out here carries memories you don't want living under your skin." Looked up at him, the man who owned this spread of Montana grass and sky, who had given her a room and 3 meals a day without asking for rent or reasons. His face was lined. It's the way good fences are lined, strong and honest and patient. She felt suddenly small and young and a little bit found. "I can take care of myself," Mr. Garach said. The words soft because they didn't feel true anymore. Smiled the slow smile of a man who had heard every kind of brave talk and still kept bandages in his pocket. "No, you believe that, darlin', bought out. Here we take care of each other whether we planned on it or no. That's the only rule worth keeping." Pulled a clean red bandana from his neck and poured a little water from his canteen onto it, the same canteen that had ridden with him since his boys were small and still thought their daddy could rope the moon. The cloth was warm from his skin when he pressed it gently to her knee, cleaning away the dirt and dried blood with the care of someone handling something breakable and precious. Martha felt the sting and something else, a warmth that started where his fingers brushed her skin and spread slow and steady through her chest like sunrise over the hills. She watched his hands, rough from years of rope and reins, and yet so careful now. And she remembered her own father's hands before the drinking took him away. Hands that had once fixed her bicycle and later couldn't fix breakfasto. "Don't have to do this," whispered Elias. Didn't look up from his work eye. "No, I don't. Have toy want others a difference big as the sky between those two things. And I learned it late, but I learned it, Goodwin." The worst of the grit was gone. He reached into his vest pocket and drew out a small tin of salve his wife Sarah had made before the cancer took her 10 years ago. The scent of it, lavender and something green, rose between them like a memory neither of them had shared yet. But both recognized it. "Hazel, keep it from scarring too bad," said, smoothing it over the wound with the ball of his thumb. Sarah swore by its side. "Pretty knees were worth saving." I never argued with her about much, but never about that. Martha felt tears gather without permission. "Not pretty, Mr. Garedium. Just last." Tied the bandana around her knees snug but not tight, then sat back on his heels and looked at her full in the face. It's the way men used to look at women before everything got fast and loud and careless. Martha said her name like it already belonged to him. "You are the prettiest lost thing I've seen in years. And I've seen plenty, but lost don't have to mean alone it, if you decide differently." Horse stamped behind him, impatient for grain and evening. Elias rested one hand on the dirt beside her boot clothes, enough that she could feel the heat coming off his skin. She looked at that hand and thought about all the years it carried, all the fences it had mended, all the calves it had pulled into the world, all the coffee cups it had held on cold mornings when the loneliness felt bigger than the land. Reached out slow and laid her fingers over his. They were trembling just a little. She said, trying the name out loud for the first time. "I don't know what I'm doing here. I don't know what I'm doing." And he weary turned his hand palm up and let her fingers settle into the lines life had drawn. "There none of us knew at 23, some of us still don't at 62, but we keep getting upwig, keep feeding what needs feeding, keep the gate open for whoever walks through. Ithos enough most days." Sun slipped lower, painting them both in the same Honey light that had painted his wedding pictures with Sarah all those years ago. Martha felt something loosen inside her chest, something that had been knotted since she was 16 and learned that love could turn mean when it ran out of money. Leaned forward just enough that her forehead rested. Against Tysium, tired of running, set against his skin eye. No baby answered. Voice rough with gentle eye. Surely no didn't kiss her then, though the want was there plain as prairie wind instead. He stood and offered his hand. Come on, let's get you inside before the mosquitoes decide your supper well. Put some coffee on. And sit on the porch the way folks use tono horreno owing, just to people letting the evening find them. Martha took his hand and let him pull her up. Her knee complained, but held. She limped beside him across the yard, the old dog trotting ahead. Like he'd been waiting for this exact moment. The screen door creaked, the same welcome it had creaked for Sarah and for Elisa's mother before her, and probably for some woman in a sunbonnet. 100 years ago, inside the kitchen smelled of wood smoke and cinnamon from the apples he'd cooked down that morning. He sat her at the big oak table, poured coffee into thick mugs that didn't care about fashion, and pushed the sugar toward her. Without asking how she took it, some things you just learn by watching. Thee talked then the way people do when they've decided the truth is safer than Salenche. Told him about the city job that chewed her up and spit her out, about the man who said forever and left when the rent came due, about driving Wes with no plan except a way. He told her about raising 2 boys who now had boys of their own, about burying Sarah under the cottonwood by the creek, about waking up some mornings and forgetting for a minute that the left side of the bed was empty, about how the land keeps you honest because it doesn't care if you're lonely, it only cares if you show up. Night settled soft around the house, crickets tuning their instruments, frogs down by the pond adding bass. Martha found herself laughing at a story about a bull named Leroy who thought he was a lapdog, and Elias watched her face in the lamplight like a man discovering color after years of gray wan. The coffee was gone. He stood and held out his hand. Again, come sit with me on the porch. Swing stars are putting on their Sunday best. Tonight he sat shoulder to shoulder, the chains creaking a slow lullaby. Martha let her head rest against his upper arm, solid as cottonwood and twice as steady. After a while his arm came around her natural. As breathing, she felt his lips brush her hair, not asking, not taking, just being there. Liash said into the dark, what happens tomorrow, Whitver? We want Darlin, answered quiet and sure. Am too old to play games and too young to sleep alone. If there's kindness waiting, Sarah taught me that love doesn't have to be loud to be true. It just has to be true. Martha turned her face up to Hisi. Don't want to be anywhere else, and not tonight, Mabe. Not ever. Looked at her a long moment, the kind of look that measures a lifetime in heartbeats, and he kissed her, slow and deliberate, like a man who had learned that some things are worth doing right the first time. There was no hurry in it. Only welcome, only homecoming. Later, when the lamp was turned low and the old dog snored by the stove, Elias carried her down the hall the way he used to carry his sons when they fell asleep on the couch after Thanksgiving dinner. She weighed nothing in his arms, and everything in his heart laid her on the quilt. Sarah had pieced from shirts to worn for work, but too loved to throw away, and he undressed her with the same careful hands that had cleaned her knee. Hours be forevery, button every ribbon. A small unwrapping of trust. Martha reached for him, fingers trembling again, but sure Nosh touched the places where time had written its gentle story. The scar on his shoulder from a green horse, the laugh lines around his eyes, the strong column of his throat that still carried the faint scent of sun and leather. When he came to her, there were tears on her cheeks, but they tasted like thank ya. Moved slow, giving her all the time in the world to change her mind, but she only pulled him closer, whispering his name like a prayer she'd forgotten. She knew afterward. They lay tangled in the moonlight that spilled through the lace curtains. Elias traced lazy circles on her back, the way you gentle a skittish coal too. All right, sweetheart, asked voice husky. With wonder, Martha pressed her face into the curve of his necktie. Didn't know it could be like this, quitziful, like coming home when you didn't know you had one held her tighter. I didn't know eyes are not the second time around. Thought maybe that part of me had gone quiet for good. Turns out it was only waiting for the right voice to wake it up. I slept eventually limbs, wrapped like old vines that had finally found the right trellis to climb outside the horses nickered soft in the corral. The wind moved through the cottonwoods, telling Sarah maybe that the house was laughing again. Morning came gentle with the smell of coffee and bacon. Elias stood at the stove in his bare feet and yesterday's shirt. Martha padded in wearing one of his flannel shirts that hung to her knee. She wrapped her arms around him.